Let's review what we have learned so far in this tutorial. Let's review what we've learned so far in this activity. So here we're just getting started with JavaScript. And we talked about the difference between server-side programming and client-side programming. And that difference is that when you're using interactive coding, something that needs to be executed, server-side code is executed on the server, so it requires messages to be sent to the server, execution to happen there, and messages to be returned. Whereas client-side programming happens on the user's computer itself, so the program executes right there and data is available locally. There's no talking back and forth to the server to implement the interactivity. JavaScript is an interpreted language, right? So it's translated and executed one line at a time. We don't need a compiler. We do need a plain text editor and browser, but we're very comfortable with using those, so we're already set up for that. To connect a JavaScript file with an HTML file, we use the script tag and the source attribute. And then we talked about the difference between having the async, defer, or no attribute to identify how the page loads. There are two different kinds of comments in JavaScript, and then we use the alert function. So that's a built-in JavaScript function, and we learned how to use it. And this was our first JavaScript command. We learned some things about syntax, that you end a command with a semicolon. Remember, that's kind of optional. Commands are case sensitive, that's important, and you can use a backslash to put a string on 2 lines. We learned about a debugger that's available in the browser. We use it in Chrome, but it's available in many current browsers. And we didn't talk about this, so let's talk about it now. There are different kinds of errors. So load time error, so an error that happens when the page loads. There's a runtime error, and that happens when the code is executing, an error is produced. And a logic error, and that doesn't happen at load time or runtime. It doesn't stop either loading or running. What it does is it just produces the wrong output, like it's not what you expect. So everything compiles and runs. We don't have to compile. Everything interprets and runs, but it produces the wrong output. So these are really similar to errors that we have in other languages. Often when you make an error in JavaScript, none of the JavaScript works. Like you can have a whole bunch working. You've got a whole bunch of JavaScript code working. You've been testing it. It's working great. You add a couple new lines of code, and all of a sudden nothing works, including everything that you already had. And that's just really common with JavaScript. So you can know that the error must be in what you just added. And that's one of the values of running and coding and testing often, right? You test often so that you know everything's running great, and then you add a couple lines, then you can focus on those couple lines to find your errors. So different kinds of errors. We learned that there's developer tools available in the browsers, right? We learned about using F12 or a right click to find those developer tools. And we spent a lot of time in the sources tab. And we also looked at the console tab, which you can still see in the sources, but you can look at the errors also in the console tab. We learned that when you're in the debug mode, you can see that the error is highlighted in code. And in the console, you can find it, the file name and the line number, and you can add breakpoints, right? And when you add a breakpoint, reload, then you get that play or pause button. It goes to that breakpoint, and then you can play or pause. We added the use strict mode at the very top of the JS file, and we'll follow this pattern. And we talked about it's more efficient, faster, and encourages good programming. And then we talked about coding style, using consistent names, adding white space for readability, keeping lines compact, and commenting your code. And that's it for part 1 of this activity.